In the highlands of Oaxaca, Mexico, where colonial dust settles on adobe walls and ancient Zapotec history sleeps beneath the earth, two cousins inherited a piece of forgotten land. The property, passed down through 3 generations, had always been considered ordinary: rocky soil, sparse vegetation, and a spring that ran dry each season. But when Maria Elena decided to dig a proper well to secure water for the family's seasonal occupation of the house, neither she nor her cousin Diego anticipated what lay 30 meters below the surface. Local rumors whispered of ceremonial sites lost to time, but no one had ever found proof. When the pickaxe struck something hard, something that wasn't stone, the water that poured forth revealed not just liquid, but history. What emerged from the earth's careful preservation was a Zapotec idol of remarkable craftsmanship, untouched for centuries. Perfectly sealed by layers of sediment and groundwater, the discovery would challenge everything they thought they knew about their family's land, attract attention from archaeologists and grave robbers alike, and force them to choose between wealth and cultural legacy. Chapter 1. The Inheritance. The deed was written in faded ink, dated 1987, signed by their grandmother with a hand that trembled slightly as the pen met paper. The property existed on maps but barely in memory. A 3-hectare plot in the mountains outside Tlacolula de Matamoros, where mist clung to pine trees each morning and the air smelled of earth and ancient stone. Maria Elena stood at the property's edge on a Thursday afternoon in late September, her boots sinking into soil still damp from the previous night's rain. At 42, she had spent most of her adult life in Mexico City, managing a logistics company, visiting this land only on obligatory holidays. Her cousin Diego, 3 years younger, worked as a surveyor for the state, someone who understood earth, measurements, and what lay hidden beneath surfaces. "The spring's completely dry," Diego said, kneeling beside a rocky outcropping where water should have trickled. His hands were calloused, weathered by decades of fieldwork. "If you want to stay here during the rainy season, we need reliable water. A well is the only solution." Maria Elena nodded, pulling out a folder containing documents from their grandmother's estate. Local records suggested the property had been agricultural land centuries ago, before the Spanish arrived, before colonial reorganization shifted everything. A handwritten note dated 1960 mentioned that their great-grandfather had found curious stones while clearing the upper field but never investigated further. "How deep would we need to go?" she asked. 20 to 30 meters, maybe. There's definitely water down there. I can feel it in the ground." Diego smiled. He had always been the one who seemed to speak the earth's language. "My equipment says there's a significant aquifer beneath this whole area. Could be seasonal runoff from the mountains, could be deeper reserves." They hired local workers, 3 men from the village who had handled construction projects for decades. The work began on a Monday morning, the sound of pickaxes and shovels echoing across the isolated property. By Wednesday, they had descended 6 meters. By Friday, 12. Maria Elena visited the site each evening after leaving her Mexico City office, driving 2 hours to watch the progress and stand at the mouth of the growing hole. The workers moved efficiently, removing loose rock and clay, bracing the walls with wooden supports. The air grew cooler as they dug deeper, and the smell changed, from the green scent of pine and growing things to something older, mineral-rich, almost metallic. On the 8th day of work, Diego pulled her aside. His expression was strange, not frightened, but curious in a way she hadn't seen before. "The workers found something. They're not sure what it is. Could be just an old foundation stone. But—" He trailed off, leading her to the well's mouth. At 27 meters down, visible where the afternoon light still reached, the wall of clay shifted color. There was something else embedded in the earth. A dark shape, geometric, distinct from the natural stone around it. "We'll reach it tomorrow," Diego said quietly. Maria Elena stared into the darkness below, not knowing that her life and her understanding of her family's history was about to transform completely. Chapter 2. The first sign. The discovery began as a line, a straight, deliberate edge where nature rarely operated. The workers saw it first, their machetes and picks hesitating as they recognized something fundamentally different from the layered earth and random stones that had occupied the well for the past week and a half. Diego descended into the shaft at dawn, his headlamp cutting through the darkness, his boots landing softly on the compacted clay floor. The shape was carved stone, definitely. The edge was too precise, too intentional. What emerged as he carefully cleared away the surrounding soil was the corner of something larger, something that had been waiting in the dark for longer than anyone could calculate. "Stop," he called up to the workers. "No more digging here. We need to be careful." Maria Elena arrived at the site by 8 a.m., finding the well surrounded by silence. The workers stood aside, speaking in low voices in Zapotec, a language she had never learned despite her grandmother's efforts when she was young. Diego was still below, working with small brushes and carefully sculpted sticks, the way she imagined an archaeologist might work. By midday, the shape had become clearer, a carved stone face approximately 2 meters tall, with features that belonged unmistakably to Zapotec artistry. The proportions were formal, geometric, the eyes almond-shaped and solemn. The stone itself was dark, almost black, polished smooth by the hands that had sculpted it perhaps 1,000 years ago. "It's an idol," Diego said, his voice steady but carrying a tremor of awe. "Pre-Hispanic, definitely. The style. It's similar to pieces I've seen in the Oaxaca museums, but this one, Maria Elena, this one is intact." The news spread through the village by evening. A local teacher arrived, then a journalist from the regional newspaper. By nightfall, a representative from the NIH, Mexico's National Institute of Anthropology and History, was en route from Oaxaca City, but not everyone who heard the news felt excitement. In a cantina on the village's main street, a man with expensive boots and a gold watch listened carefully to the conversation around him. His phone made 3 calls that night. By morning, other people without archaeological credentials or official papers, had begun asking questions about the property's exact location. Chapter 3. The water rises. The rain came heavier than the seasonal forecast had predicted. A system moved up from the Pacific, and for 36 hours, water fell on the Oaxaca highlands in sheets. The workers had covered the well with tarpaulin, securing it with rope and sandbags, but everyone understood the precarious mathematics of excavation during storms. On the second morning, Diego called Maria Elena before she left the city. "Water's seeping into the well," and he said, "We're pumping it out, but it's coming faster than we can move it. The idol, we need to protect it. If water sits against the stone for too long, and the weather clears suddenly, thermal shock could crack it." Maria Elena made the drive in 3 hours, arriving as the rain began to ease. The well was transformed. Where there had been a carefully controlled excavation, there was now chaos, organized, urgent chaos. Diego and the INA representative, a woman named Dr. Patricia Flores, stood at the well's mouth, discussing options with voices pitched low but intense. "We can't remove it in these conditions," Dr. Flores said. She was perhaps 60, with silver hair pulled back severely, her hands stained with clay. "The stone's been in stable conditions for centuries. Moving it now, wet and destabilized, we could damage what's potentially the most intact Zapotec idol found in this region in 30 years. If the water keeps rising, it stays here," Diego countered. "We can reinforce the supports, keep the tarp sealed, but we need to do it now, before the pumps fail or the ground becomes unstable." It was then that a truck arrived, a vehicle that had no business being on this rural road, driven by a man Maria Elena didn't recognize. He got out slowly, surveying the site with the kind of assessment that made her instinctively step closer to Diego. "Beautiful property," the man said, his accent placing him from somewhere in the capital. "Heard there's valuable artifacts here. Would the owners consider—" "The site is under INA protection," Dr. Flores said sharply. "Whatever is here belongs to Mexico's cultural heritage. Leave, or I contact federal authorities." The man smiled thinly and returned to his truck. But as he drove away, Diego met Maria Elena's eyes. Both understood the same thing. The idol's existence had created a problem beyond archaeology or preservation. By that evening, the tarpaulin was reinforced, the pumps were working steadily, and federal guards, 2 men in official uniforms, had been posted to the property. The rain had stopped and a cold wind moved through the mountains, carrying the scent of stone and possibility. If you're enjoying this adventure so far, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Chapter 4. The Revelation. The water that exposed the idol came not from the well but from controlled de-excavation, a careful lowering of the groundwater table using agricultural pumps positioned strategically around the site. The INA had brought equipment, specialists, and a photographer who documented every centimeter as the stone emerged fully from its earthen tomb. The idol stood almost 2 meters tall, carved from a single piece of dark volcanic stone. Basalt, Dr. Flores confirmed. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. Each feature had been rendered with patience and precision. The face bore the characteristics of Zapotec artistry, geometric complexity, symbolic elements carved into the headdress, a formal posture that suggested ceremony rather than violence. But it was the chamber surrounding the idol that transformed the discovery from significant to extraordinary. As the water level dropped, the archaeological team uncovered a sealed space, a ritual chamber that had been deliberately constructed around the idol, then carefully filled and sealed. Inside were artifacts, ceramic vessels still intact, their patterns suggesting they had held offerings, carved jade pieces, though small, obsidian blades arranged in patterns that suggested they had maintained their positioning for centuries, and beneath the idol's base, carved directly into the stone, a series of glyphs. "This is a dedication stone," Dr. Flores explained, photographing the glyphs carefully. "These symbols indicate a name, probably of the figure depicted, possibly of the person who commissioned it, and this date glyph. If I'm reading it correctly, this was carved sometime in the 13th century. Pre-conquest, certainly. This predates Columbus by 2.5 centuries. Maria Elena stood at the well's edge, looking down at the idol that had waited beneath her family's property since before Spain had even united its kingdoms. The thought was vertiginous. Generations of her ancestors had walked this earth, not knowing what lay 30 meters below. "Why here?" she asked. "Why bury something so valuable?" "It wasn't buried as treasure," Diego said quietly. "It was sealed and preserved. In many Mesoamerican cultures, objects of spiritual significance weren't displayed like we do in museums. They were placed in specific locations as permanent offerings or seals. This chamber, it was meant to be discovered someday, yes, but only by people who understood its significance." That night, a video of the idol spread through social media. The INA had posted official documentation, a photograph of the carved face emerging from the earth, water still dripping from the stone. Within hours, it had been shared thousands of times. Within a day, it appeared on news outlets across Mexico and internationally. With the publicity came attention that wasn't always welcome. More men arrived, men in civilian clothes who asked questions about mining rights, land transfers, and what Maria Elena might be willing to accept for the property. Federal authorities moved the guards to a permanent camp. The site became officially closed to unauthorized access. Chapter 5. The Choice. The university offered 4 million pesos. The private collector, operating through lawyers in Mexico City, offered double that. With complications, Maria Elena understood instantly. The idol would disappear into a private collection, seen by no one, valued only for its market price. The INAH offered something different. Full partnership in the preservation and study of the site, with Maria Elena and Diego recognized as co-discoverers. The property eventually becoming a protected cultural site, with managed tourism potential and ongoing research funding. "They want to turn my land into a museum," Maria Elena said bitterly. She sat in Diego's kitchen in Oaxaca City, documents spread across the table. The weeks since the discovery had compressed her life into decisions she never imagined making. "They want to protect it. Diego corrected gently. And you'd still own the land. You'd just be stewarding something that's bigger than both of us now. I inherited dirt and rock. I didn't inherit history. Didn't you? Diego smiled sadly. Our grandmother knew something was here. That note about curious stones. She would have told us if we'd asked the right questions. This land has always been connected to the people who came before us. The private collector's lawyer called again. The university made an improved offer, but neither addressed the core problem. Maria Elena had spent 20 years building a life in Mexico City, managing logistics, thinking in terms of quarterly reports and supply chains. This idol, this 700-year-old carved stone, demanded something she wasn't sure she possessed: commitment to something with no profit margin. Then a letter arrived from the village's municipal government. It contained something no one else had offered: a proposal from the local Zapotec Cultural Foundation and the Education Department. They wanted to establish a learning center adjacent to the archaeological site, a facility that would employ local people, train students in conservation and tourism, and ensure that the idol's story remained connected to the community that had lived above it for centuries. The letter was written in Spanish, but it was also available in Zapotec. It included the signatures of 43 local families. Maria Elena read it 3 times. By the end of the week, she had made her choice. Chapter 6. The Legacy. The ceremonial opening of the Tlacolula Archaeological Preserve occurred on a Saturday in December, 18 months after the first pickaxe struck something harder than stone. The president of the INA attended. So did Maria Elena's colleagues from her old company, some confused about why she had stepped back from her logistics position, others understanding immediately. But the crowd that mattered most was the local one, the workers who had dug the well, the teacher who had recognized the idol's significance, the families from the village who had signed the letter supporting the cultural center. Children from the local school carried flowers, a tradition that had nothing to do with archaeology and everything to do with respect. The idol stood in its protective chamber, a climate-controlled facility built with a combination of federal funding and private donations. Visitors could view it through reinforced glass, reading the story of its discovery, understanding the Zapotec culture that had created it. Beside the display, a video showed the excavation process: Diego carefully clearing earth, the water slowly revealing the carved features, the moment when everyone understood what they had found. The cultural center, built on adjacent property that Maria Elena had negotiated into the project, employed 12 people from the village. It offered courses in conservation, pre-Hispanic history, and tourism management. School groups from Oaxaca City visited monthly. The hotel in the village, which had been nearly empty during off-season, now operated at capacity throughout the year. Maria Elena, no longer running logistics for a Mexico City company, had become something unexpected: the director of cultural development for the preserve. She worked 4 days a week, spent 1 day in Oaxaca City managing administrative details, and spent the remaining days living in the house that had inherited her, on the land that had inherited her, stewarding something that had been waiting for someone to recognize its value. She stood at the well one evening, looking down at the chamber where the idol had rested for centuries. Diego was beside her, as he had been through all of this, holding a small notebook. "The glyphs," he said. Dr. Flores decoded them finally. The idol is named for a Zapotec word that means keeper of memory. It was created to ensure that history wouldn't be lost, that the knowledge of the people who came before would be preserved for those who came after. Maria Elena smiled. She had inherited no fortune, though the idol's cultural value was immeasurable. She had inherited no ancient secrets, though now she spent her days protecting and sharing them. She had inherited simply a piece of earth and the opportunity to understand that some treasures couldn't be sold or moved or locked away. They could only be protected, studied, and shared. The stone face, with its almond eyes and formal headdress, seemed to watch over the valley as the sun descended behind distant mountains. Somewhere in that carved expression was the patience of centuries, the understanding that the most valuable discoveries weren't always the ones that brought wealth, but the ones that brought connection to who we had been and who we were becoming. If this treasure hunt already has you hooked, hit the like button. It helps us bring more forgotten stories to light. Epilogue: The Memory Keeper. The Zapotec idol's true treasure was never the carved stone itself, but the doorway it opened, to history, to community, to the understanding that inheritance isn't always measured in currency. Maria Elena's choice to protect and share the discovery became the model for 7 other archaeological sites in the Oaxaca region. Young people from the village now pursue formal training in archaeology and conservation, many returning home to work on the preserve. The well that started as a simple solution to a water problem became a pathway to something deeper than liquid, a pathway to memory, meaning, and the profound responsibility of stewarding what the earth has preserved for us. In choosing legacy over profit, Maria Elena discovered that the greatest treasure lies not in what we possess, but in what we pass forward, the stories that connect past and present, reminding us that we are always custodians of something larger than ourselves. Subscribe to our channel for more incredible tales of discovery and hidden history. See you in the next adventure.